Welcome to The New Next, a podcast that addresses current events and how they will impact the future. Co-hosted by the inquisitive public speaking champion, Mike McVeigh, and energy, economics, and technology expert, Matt Jensen. Join us as we explore all things energy, economic, tech, and political, and how they will affect our future. Hey, Matt, it's been too long.
How's it going?
Well, I won't lie. I have consumed your book so many times now. I think it's about time you write your next book in the series, and it's almost inspired me to write the second book of my series.
Nice. Yeah, I'm trying to think about what it should be right now. I'm thinking about artificial intelligence as probably or computer vision. So,
well, the ABCs of those is I will definitely be glad to get a copy.
yeah, I should probably just do artificial intelligence. So
let's see. So, in all the world happenings, probably the most important thing is what goes on at my work, at least to me. And one of my employees and I, our coworkers and I, we've been talking. He's recently been doing a lot of real estate type stuff, trying to learn some of the vocab, and ultimately, he's trying
courses.
Yeah, I don't know exactly who he's going through specifically, like for the actual certifications, but there's a lot of influence that comes from like Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Yeah.
And there's some others that are almost on that kind of guru side kind of thing. They're not necessarily gurus, but they're right on the line of kind of like Grant Cardone kind of stuff. And I'm not bashing it, at least not on this episode. So
yeah. We all know how you feel about Grant Cardone. And the Cardone zone.
The Cardone zone what?
I said, and the Cardone zone.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, well, ultimately, I actually like all those people that I've mentioned. I just think there's a certain limit to what their advice comes down to. In fact, that's kind of what I think we're going to talk about for a little bit is, one, how much does financial literacy play into your potential wealth, I guess. And then the second thing is a specific strategy that both Kiyosaki and Cardone specifically mention as the easiest way to make wealth. And then the sustainability of how many people can involve themselves. Does that sound about fair to for you to rip me apart and tell me how I'm wrong?
Totally.
So
I'm ready. I'm like a grizzly bear.
I know. Like, you're sitting up. You're like, all right, let's get this on.
I got a taste of blood. I'm ready to tear
I can see it already. So I do completely agree with my coworker about the fact that financial literacy and talking about how things actually work in society, like how money works, is not something that's taught in our school systems. For the most part, I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule, but colleges, even business majors and stuff, do not talk about how money actually works. They talk about more of they describe money and how it works as opposed to talking about the details. So I completely 100% agree with the fact that most Americans do not have an understanding of anything about money. Yeah. And as I said, he's specifically influenced by Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad program. And I've gone through a free version of that because I never had enough money to enter in at the times that I was most interested.
Have you read the book?
Yes. And I've read a couple of the editions that were specifically made, like the kid version or one specifically made for, I forgot which one it was, but like it was a specific industry or something.
Yeah. I've only read Rich Dad, Poor Dad and then listened to his content.
And I don't really know as much on, like, I don't think there's as much argument about financial literacy, but it's the main concept of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is what inspires the title, is, the rich dad, or Kiyosaki's blood dad, his biological dad, works for a college, and it's like, this is the life. You just get tenure, and everything will be taken care of. You don't have to worry about things. And Kiyosaki's best friend, his dad, was a mover and shaker in the business world, and basically said that the worst thing you can do is just expect people to pay you. And that's a very simplified version, but Kiyosaki reflects multiple times through the book about that his biological dad is his poor dad, and then his best friend's dad ends up kind of being a substitute dad. And one of the things I'll even say, and this has been my argument with my coworker multiple times, I don't think anybody can just start completely from scratch without somebody reaching out or somebody being able to give you that first kind of bump. And even in the book, Kiyosaki mentions how his rich dad gives him loans at ages that adults generally don't give teenagers. Now, Kiyosaki was meant to pay it back, and he had a time frame and stuff, but just the fact that it was entrusted to him is something that most people never get that kind of opportunity, possibly ever, let alone when they're a teenager, and having someone guide them around as well.
Most people aren't making those opportunities for themselves.
Yeah. Well, that's that ends up in a side argument that I have with my coworker. And when I say argument, it's not like we're yelling at each other or anything. It's not even usually contentious. It's just looking at it differently. And he's like, well, that's why, you just convince a bank person to give you a loan. You just have to be a good influence, be really good at negotiation. And I'm like, yeah, I'll speak from my world. Because I do have a credit score now and things, my stuff is being built. My opportunities to get loans or to get chances have more to do with my history. I have a hard time believing that an 18-year-old kid who's never had a job, who has no collateral and has no one supporting them, is going to be able to get even a small loan from a bank, no matter how good their negotiation skills are.
Well, they should.
That did not. Your mic's not.
Oh, I said they. Why should they get a loan if they're not going out, getting a job and stuff like that? There's plenty of ability to get jobs as a teenager.
Well, good. So I'm glad that we agree on this, because I know I'm getting ready to get ripped apart at some point. So, and this is an argument. He's like, no. All you have to do is, you just have to be able to convince somebody to give you money. I was like, right. But that, to me, it speaks of a certain kind of, and I really don't want to use the word I'm getting ready to use, but I really don't have a better one. But it speaks to a certain kind of privilege that you would even have opportunities at a younger age to get someone to invest in you, as in you. There are exceptions to everything, but does that make sense? I mean, even if you disagree with me, does that make sense? And he's like, no. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I think obviously I come from a privileged perspective or background in this perspective, because I grew up in family business and had opportunities to make money, working with other people doing labor, and then I guess what you would call typically white collar jobs, as a teenager and stuff. But
right.
I've done a lot of other jobs for other people over the years. So like roofing, like installing sprinklers, selling different products like door to door, like, selling stuff online and stuff like that, building websites and doing IT work, technical work. So that's all stuff I did on my own. Basically before I was like 16 years old, went out and made it happen. And I don't really, so like I recognize that I think like the privilege is in the fact that you know that you can do it. And like that's I think being around and seeing it from other people and being able to model it is where the privilege is. But I don't really think, like in America, there's literally so many opportunities to make money, especially as a teenager. And most of those people too are typically better with technology and stuff like that. So it's, yeah, I just, so I get the point. So basically my point is I've never felt that being, having someone else invest in you is really a determinant of success. And I think that's kind of like, there's, a lot of people in the economy are waiting to be picked rather than basically picking themselves and, you know, going out and making it. So some of the, at least in my community, some of the most successful people that I see are some of these like landscaping companies. And like there's one in particular that I know is owned by an immigrant, and you know, he's got like this really solid cash flow company. They do really good work locally, and that's I think an example of someone that, well, so basically like like I think the general perspective from it is wrong. Like I look at it from the person as investing, is they're not looking at the person necessarily. If they're doing it correctly as they should be, they're managing credit risk. So if you're like a brilliant kid, even though you come from nothing, then that lowers your credit risk on an opportunity, and then you're more likely to invest in. So
maybe I should back up a little bit, because the work that he's talking about specifically, we're not talking, I mean, all the stuff you mentioned, I completely agree with. If you're willing to put yourself out there and doing those smaller ventures that can lead to bigger things, that wasn't necessarily what I was talking about. So I apologize for not being more clear. We're talking about specifically like flipping houses and being a landlord. He's saying at 18 that a bank should just trust him if he's convincing enough that they will give enough money to buy a house to flip without any work history, without any, just because his plan is good enough to do that. And my argument was, the only way that's going to happen, even if it's the bank's going to have to choose that your idea is just so good, despite the fact that you've never flipped houses before. Oh, no, I've gone through a program. I'm like, no, that's not how it works. And so that's where part of my argument has always been, is that how are you raising the money to put down some collateral? And he's like, well, you only need collateral if you don't have experience. And I'm like, yes, that's my point. You don't have any experience. So where are you getting the trust that the bank is going to say, we're going to take a chance on you, or an investor or whoever?
Well, I think it's a double-edged sword, because if you talk about like, especially not house flipping, but housing access in general, like something that you always have so talk about a real world story. There were, prior to the great financial crisis in Seattle, when I was still living in Seattle, there were a lot of basically loans targeted to low income, low wage, kind of like minority communities in certain areas of the city, that the loans were based not on on their ability, like their credit willing or rating and stuff, and ability to pay, but rather on these things that didn't matter, I guess, to that, to like the kind of financial transaction. So I saw that, when the financial crisis hit and kind of like adjustable rate mortgages went out of whack, there was just a flood in specific pockets of the city of these houses basically were foreclosed on and had to go on the market. Right. So I think when banks make decisions based on factors that aren't intangible or aren't related to the ability of the people to repay a loan, that has nothing to do based on, like in that context. I'm not saying that's 100% on their financial credit history and stuff like that, but it should always be on that credit rating, because otherwise you get people in situations where when the tide turns, then they're financially ruined. And, there's a lot of people that aren't maybe sophisticated on the financial stuff and expect mortgage bankers and whatever to give them good advice, and get in situations where stuff like that happens. But on top of it too, when you have a lot of people that can't afford homes that are given loans to flood into the market, they increase prices and then further accentuate, the price of it. So like I believe housing's like a huge issue in the US, and housing ownership should be more affordable for people. But when you're basically just giving people loans on stuff like that, I consider that irresponsible banking. And from an aggregate society perspective, I think that's incredibly irresponsible. So if you're talking about like private loans or stuff, or like family stuff like that, so in the case of this guy that you're talking about, they know him better. So if he has like a rich uncle or something that wants to put, a third of essentially the down payment down, so a third of a house so they can flip it and stuff, I think that's an entirely different situation than broader credit strategy from banks to give it to people that aren't necessarily going to be able to pay it back. So they're essentially going to take their money and take their wealth in the process.
And again, I'm not, and I think we actually agree on a lot of what you just said. Like, I don't think that goes against, like, from my understanding of the 2009 financial crisis, through the research I've read on my own, that all matches. That doesn't, even with the stuff of like Bernie Madoff and stuff, that stuff matches what I understand, even if I'm not always able to articulate it as clearly as I would like.
Well, they used to call some of them, they called them ninja mortgages. It was no income, no job.
Right. And I think, so, and again, this is only one employee or one coworker, but I think this is a concept. And I'm going to tie it back to Rich Dad Poor Dad and Cardone and stuff in just a minute. But there's this idea that you can just go and flip houses without, or, you go buy real estate. And I'm like, so where are you getting the money from? Like, what's the start of it? Well, you just have to negotiate. You just have to be convincing. And I'm like,
well, so you can, in certain areas of the US, you can get houses for free. And
really?
Yeah. So like Detroit, for instance, I know that they're giving houses for free. Because there's a lot of places where they have abandoned homes, and they're basically getting worse by the day. So if you get a body in there to actually work on it, you're basically preserving the community and stuff like that. Tulsa, I think, is a good example because there's a lot behind it, but there would be like a abandoned house, and then like a really tight knit community around it. And it's kind of like, well, this isn't necessarily a high income area, but, having this abandoned house here basically lowers everybody's housing values in the area.
Gotcha. Yeah. And again, that, well, he's in Oklahoma City, so well, at least, and he's not looking at talking about other states and stuff. And we talk about it, and because I have at least gone through a couple of the same courses that he's going through now, but, and one of the things he and his family and I, I'm not listing names or anything, but, the house that he and his wife had originally had was not in a great neighborhood, in 2020, but it was, they were able to get a house to mortgage and stuff, and it was decent enough. And then with all the housing stuff that's happened in specifically 2021, they sold their house in Oklahoma for way more than it was initially worth. But the housing, I don't even know what to call it, the housing flood.
Yeah.
Basically, it raised the price where, like, I think the house was about $85,000 was like what they bought it for, because of the need and specifically where they're located, which again was not a good area overall. They sold it for, after paying off the rest of their house and paying bills and stuff, they basically pocketed $150,000.
Oh, wow. That's great.
And then now, and they've got a new house in an area that's much more reflective of, like if they were to raise their children or something, that they would feel comfortable. They wouldn't be scared about a drive-by or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that joking. Like his whole life, he comes from those kinds of neighborhoods where,
Southwest Oklahoma City.
Yeah, actually, exactly where he comes from. But not like as far deep as I am, but like actually like around the
I know where you're talking about.
The poorer areas,
like up towards the river.
Yeah, closer to what we would call the hood or the ghettos of Oklahoma City. That's basically where he grew up. Yeah. And so once he sold his house and now they have money, and he and his wife have done some choices, they're like, oh, well, hey, this was easy. We bought a house and we just sold it. So we should do this. And he has a friend that's one of the things he does in his business. That's one of the reasons what's inspired him to do this. And I'm like, no, that's cool. But there's a lot of factors that went into it that you're forgetting about, it's not like you just bought a house, sold and flipped it. There's a lot of factors that happened. And
well, so does he have a friend that's doing it successfully now?
Yes. And that after they sold their house, that's when his friend took notice in him, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
A very good friend to notice him then. And that's part of my.
I mean, it's hard to mentor people if they don't have money to actually do it. Right.
And that's part of my argument, is saying that to me, having money is still a type of privilege. I'm not, the difference between working at McDonald's minimum wage and working, in a different job that's even 50 cents more than that, there's a difference, and it gives you more power in a certain way. So I'm not arguing whether one job's better or worse or anything like that. It's just the more money you have, however you accumulate that and however you do that, it gives you a privilege or a fortune or just a way to be able to do things you weren't able to do before. That's my argument. Yeah. So when I say privilege and stuff, I don't necessarily mean like it's just given to you and you're not earning it and stuff. It's, but there's a difference again between that person who's working at McDonald's full time and saving, as opposed to someone that's like, oh no, just give me money. I'm going to buy a house and flip it.
Well, the whole flipping thing, I think, is kind of like get rich quick. Like if you look at historically and I say that with, kind of in quotes, right? Like I think a lot of people see it on TV and they're like, oh, I did this in 30 days and made $100,000, so, but historically, the best way for to build wealth in America is through real estate.
Oh yeah,
100%. So what your friend's doing right. And then also on the business side, to have a mentor that's actually successful in it. Mm-hmm. So I know for myself, I've always reached out and wanted to have access to mentors or be around people that really stimulate me intellectually and trigger me to learn and develop myself better. So I think what your friend is doing is really what, the rich dad, poor dad would advocate, is understanding kind of a market, really getting into it, and then finding mentorship, someone that's actually doing it that can kind of walk you through it. And then as you come through scenarios where there might be potential pitfalls, having someone to talk you through it, help you learn, hold your hand, and really kind of mentor you through the process.
Yeah. And I think that's actually part of so that's when it starts switching a little bit. Like everything you said, I completely agree. And I agree with the historical thing about wealth and stuff as well, coming through property. So this is where I start having issues with Kiyosaki specifically, because Kiyosaki makes it sound like it's really easy to just acquire property. In Rich Dad Poor Dad specifically, and then some of his other supplemental materials.
It's a lot easier than you think.
Well, tell me how and give me money, darn it. Get rich quick. And there's in Grant Cardone, what his big thing is, which is this is why I'm tying him into it, because, but it's the whole idea of passive income. Yeah, not necessarily unique to Cardone by any means. And I get a little bit more animated, I guess you could say, when it comes to what people are calling passive income, especially when it's not passive income.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
It's because to me, real estate, this is my perspective. Let me make sure. So where I come from in the world, where I am in the world, this is what I'm talking from. I'm not talking from the business sense of what it's actually called. If you're flipping houses or you're landlording in areas that historically people are able to, they're good tenants, or you're more likely to have a good tenant probably in a better neighborhood or apartment complex than you are in an area that's where he grew up and stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so is that what you guys are doing, or is you're going kind of like middle class up or upper lower class and stuff? And he's like, well, no, we're doing it in lower class area. I'm like, okay, so what do you do in these certain situations? Well, he's like, well, if they don't have a certain credit score, we're not going to let them rent. I'm like, okay. So I get that. I mean, I get this on the financial side of you're trying to protect your stuff, but you're also flipping an area, or I keep on using flipping. I apologize. Mm-hmm. You're talking about managing real estate in an area that right now there's nobody in that area that's going to be like, you're not going to have a young family like the Jensens or the McVeys come in there and be like, oh, I'm willing to live in this crap hole and paying as much as what I could in one of the suburbs or in a nicer housing addition just a few miles away. I'm not going to pay that same amount when I'm afraid that I'm going to get shot or I'm going to get robbed just by walking outside my house.
Well,
he's like, no.
There's more opportunity, I think, to make money on it potentially. So because of that. Well, so sometimes, areas like that wouldn't really necessarily work for institutional companies. So, the institutional companies, like fund companies that do like at scale renovations of apartments and stuff like that, they're probably going to be focused on a different market. So that drives up prices for stuff like that. And it's also very difficult to compete against those people in bidding stuff. So, I think it's generally good to focus on what you know and he's already been successful in doing that. So I don't really, or like I understand why he would continue to want to do it, basically.
Well, no, he's not yet been successful other than selling his specific house that he lived in, which they weren't even looking at selling at the time that happened.
Yeah.
He has yet to flip, sell, manage property.
Okay.
Now his business partner has, I don't know his business partner, so I don't have any, this is from what he tells me. So I want to make sure that that's clear as well. I don't know. Have you lived in the poor side of neighborhood before?
Yeah.
Well, good. I don't know. There's a way you can make more money off of it, but I think that those are, I don't know, when you're paying more to live there than where it costs for me to live here, and everything around you is bad, I don't think that's sustainable. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I mean,
looked at numbers.
Yeah. I don't really know anything about it because it's all dependent on specific stuff on whether or not it's a good investment, I think. But
yeah, it's, and part of it is, so this leads to the other argument of why, so both the Kiyosaki or Rich Dad Poor Dad and Cardone, in fact, I'm still getting contacted by Cardone's company 5 years later, because I put an initial interest in, like, I'd like to receive more information. And I remember back in 2007, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I'd read the book, and I was at the poorest I'd ever been. We were literally on food stamps, not by choice. Meredith had just been born. She was not quite a year. And Brenda had some stuff, so she wasn't able to work. And my work was, we were basically to provide and just enough to get by. And I'd read Rich Dad Poor Dad. It's like, hey, if you'd like more information, send a thing in on this request. So I did. Mm-hmm. A couple days later, they're like, yes, Robert Kiyosaki wants to personally invite you to his thing that's going on next month, and blah, 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 blah. It's only going to be $12,000 and da, 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 da.
Wow.
I'm like, my family doesn't make $12,000. And they're like, oh, click. But then they would call me again a month later and like, hey, Robert Kiyosaki wants to personally invite you to this thing and everything. And so I was like, well, how much does it cost? They're like, well, all the benefits you get. And I'm like, that's great. How much does it cost? And they're like, well, it costs $5,000. I'm like, don't get me wrong. I'm not debating whether or not the value is worth it. So that's not my concern.
That's a lot of money.
But my income at the time, before Brenda was good enough to be able to work again, was about $4,000 a year. And I'm like, I'm sure it's worth it. But I think you guys are going to need to remove me from your list because, I'm not going to be making the kind of money necessary to do hardly anything other than buy your books, maybe your board game, for a while. And, but they still kept calling. And finally, when they realized like, oh, he doesn't have money, they stopped bothering me. The problem with Cardone's, stuff is that I've read he's very forthright in his books about his strategies on how he does things. And he's like, even when people say no and stuff, we're going to still call back a week later just to make sure, we're going to make sure we're going to do everything possible to keep you from continuing to say no. And his stuff is even more expensive. Yeah.
Yeah. I looked it up. It was so wild. Like 30,000.
When we were running our travel agency, I had just read, Michael Michalowicz's, Profit First series, which I'm a big fan of. It matches a lot of stuff that we've talked about in the past, and
I haven't heard of it.
So I contacted, and they set me up with a person, and they're like, "So how much does your company make per year?" And I'm like, "Well, our company makes like I think I said 75,000 to 100,000 a year." And she's like, "Oh, so you're not really a company?" And I'm like, excuse me. She's like, you guys can't afford this. This like, we charge, $30,000 to $50,000 a year to partner up with you to do this. I'm like, $30,000 to $50,000 a year. I'm sure it's worth it.
If it helps you double your money, then it's definitely worth it, right?
But that was I wasn't talking about that we were making profit 75 to 100. Like we were making 75 to 100 as a company, and so operating costs and stuff. Yes, we could have done loans and stuff, but there was no way to have been able to pay that based on our operating costs because we were already operating on. And I know this is something that you would probably like, yeah, but you shouldn't have done that. That's fine, but that's what we did. We were operating on basically what we needed to get by and not putting any more cost into the business that if it wasn't necessary because we were on such tight margins.
Yeah.
So there's a big gap between what poor people, and I'll put myself in that category, or poor mindset, if you want to use the rich dad, poor dad thing.
Poor people mindset.
I have a poor people mindset, or at least the middle. Screw you.
Well, we're trying to change that. So
are we?
Have to recognize it.
If you would like to learn more about the New Next podcast, find us at thenewnextpodcast.com, where you can suggest a topic you would like for us to cover. If you enjoyed what you heard, share the podcast, tell a friend about it, or rate us with 5 stars.